Ukraine, north of Chernigov, not far from the Chernigov-Kiev road, in a small village called Lemeshi, Nataija Rozum was married to a Ukrainian Kazakh, Grigory Yakovlevich Rozum. Her son, Aleksej Rozum, had a heavenly, beautiful singing voice. Captain Vishnevsky heard his voice while passing by and took Aleksej Rozum to St. Petersburg with him. Well, he could have gone back home, but to tell you the truth, he liked St. Petersburg, and he met somebody there he really liked. So he never left St. Petersburg. Heir to the throne, Elizaveta Petrovna fell in love with him and made him first in her court in 1731, and eventually they secretly got married. It was illegal for the royal princess to marry a common shepherd. Aleksej Rozum became Aleksej Razumovskij. Elizaveta came to power through a coup d'etat in 1741 and ruled for 20 years until 1761. Aleksej's mother, Natalia, was brought to live with them in the palace, but she wasn't happy there.
The story goes that on the way to Petersburg she was dressed and made up and was admonished to fall to her knees in the presence of the empress. Upon entering the castle and seeing the reflection of her in a mirror, the old woman assumed that it was the queen and fell to her knees in front of her own reflection.
She wasn't happy there and returned back to her little Ukrainian village. Aleksej's youngest brother was Kiril. He became part of the royal court along with Aleksej. He became president of the Research Academy. He didn't become a dancer, but he did love speaking in his native Ukrainian dialect and dancing his beloved Ukrainian dances.
By his own admission, when someone around him starts playing the bandura, he must hastily remind himself of who and where he is in order to not to start dancing the trepak.
So he fell in love with Empress Katrina of Rayeva, and he came every day from his estate Petrovskoye, which was on the road to St. Petersburg. But he was already married. Katrina didn't know that he loved her. Katrina wrote in her memoirs that after 20 years she asked him why he had visited her and her family so often. He answered,
"I was in love." "Oh, come on," I protested. "Who could have been the one that you were in love with?" Who? It was you," he answered.
His last years he lived in the village of Pochep, where he built a wonderful Voskresenskaya church and castle. Kiril's younger son, Andrei Razumovskij, was Russian ambassador to Vienna from 1793 to 1809. Beethoven dedicated his Razumovskij quartets to Andrei. Kiril had an older son, Aleksej. Aleksej was already distanced from his homeland, brought up by foreigners, and spent his time in foreign lands. He returned to Russia skeptical about all things Russian. No, this is wrong. Aleksej had a lot of children. In fact, he had 10. His partner Maria and he sired 10 children, 5 daughters and 5 sons. These were all illegal children, and he called them his pupils. He changed their last name to Perovsky, since they were living in the estate Perovsky. All these 10 children were very smart, ambitious, including one of the 5 daughters, Olga Perovskaya, who would marry Mikhail Zemchuzhnikov. Mikhail Zemchuzhnikov was part of an aristocratic family, though not rich. Sir Razumovskij invited him to his place and introduced him to all the 10 Perovsky kids. They all had a great time. He fell in love with Olga Perovskaya, and they got married. They moved to Pavlovku to raise their kids, 7 in number. They did not get divorced, but lived happily together. Family life was filled with merriment, songs, poetry, and jokes. They lived very happily together, until suddenly in 1832, Mikhail was called away to work for the government, leaving all his children and wife alone with his sister. His wife soon died from a brain infection after getting a cold. Anna, daughter of Mikhail, became wife of Viktor Arcimovich. Viktor Arcimovich was my mother's great-grandfather. He came from Polish-Lithuanian Catholic extraction. Viktor's father, Anton Arcimovich, studied in Vilnius, Lithuania. He married a Catholic, Efrosinii of Rubel, and had children, Flora, who is buried in Runtorta, Viktor, and Anton, my grandmother's godfather. Viktor Arcimovich became a governor of Tobolska. He married Anna Zemchuzhnikov. He didn't buy land in Tobolsk, but he did work there for 4 years as governor. In Tobolsk, his hair became gray, but in 4 years he managed to institute many changes and was mentioned long after. During his time in Tobolsk, the Marinskaya Women's Institute of Learning was established. His wife, Anna Mikhailovna, helped greatly in this endeavor. In addition, he attracted many young people to active participation in social issues, provided flood insurance to the poor, created urban gardens, established a newspaper. Viktor Arcimovich bought Runtorta, the property in Latvia. Viktor was very socially conscious, very concerned of the injustices in the world. At the heart of all his acts was the battle against serfdom, and he became a senator. They had 5 daughters and 1 son. One of their daughters, Vera, married Nikolaj Azbelev. Nikolaj married Vera Azbelev, daughter of Viktor, and is my great-grandmother. Nikolaj was appointed tutor to Grand Duke Georgy Alexandrovich, the younger brother of Tsar Nikolai II, who was heir to the throne at the time. In 1891, the Grand Duke was diagnosed with tuberculosis and was obliged to live in the Caucasus. Nikolai brought his whole family to live with him in Abastuban, which had very good healing mineral waters. Nikolai was absorbed by theories of astronomy for most of his life. He was a poet and author and was interested in Japan, translating various books from Japanese. He worked for a while in Nagasaki, Japan. It wasn't Nikolai, but the Grand Duke Georgy Alexandrovich, the heir to the Tsar throne whom he tutored, who had been riding his motorcycle when he had an accident, suffering great loss of blood. He was carried to the nearby farmer's house, a few kilometers from Abastuman. Although Nikolai was no longer his tutor, the news affected him greatly. In 1912, Nikolai was found dead in a hotel in Vladivostok. All evidence points to suicide as the cause, although circumstances were suspect. There was a belt around his neck attached to the bed headboard. There was no note. Vera was born in the village of Gachin near St. Petersburg. She married and divorced, then went to a sanatorium near Berlin to heal from a nervous breakdown. While in Germany, she married Wilhelm Schott. Her in-laws did not look favorably upon the marriage, especially after Vera started to visit her brother Viktor, who had been serving as a doctor in the Soviet army in a prisoner of war camp in Berlin. The way of life of a German woman, whose ideal was the 3 Ks, Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church, was something completely foreign to Vera. In 1913, Vera was born, her daughter, christened as a Lutheran. But in 1921, she abandoned her husband and daughter and moved to Runtorta, Latvia, to join her mother's sisters, daughters of Viktor Arcimovich. There, Olga, my mother, was born in 1921, a Russian Orthodox. She could not stay in Runtorta, but had to flee from the communists in 1944. Vera and my mother Olga fled from Latvia at the end of World War II in 1944 to a displaced persons camp in Esslingen, Germany. There, in 1949, Vera, my grandmother's older daughter whom she had left in Germany, visited my mother and grandmother in Esslingen. In 1949, my mother and grandmother emigrated to Brooklyn, New York. My grandmother died there in 1959.
My mother always, everywhere, wherever she did wander, found flowers to pick. I always remember her with a bouquet of flowers in her hand.
Olga Schott, my mother, was born right in Runtorta, Latvia.
I probably was a little late in being born, all wrinkled like an old lady. Rare is the child who received as much love and attention as I was. Since we spent the summers in Runtorta, my memories of the estate are full of blossoms and beautiful sunsets.
She went to school in Karsava, then studied architecture in Riga, working for a while at an architectural firm. She was not deported to Siberia, but all of her relatives were deported from Runtorta in 1941. Her great-aunt Olga, and Olga's great-nephew Vladimir Arcimovic, and his wife Tante Shura.
Baba Olga, my mother's aunt, had her own school. Everything was organized and paid by her. It was a labor of love from her. In 1944, at age 88, she was deported to Siberia to the Soviets. She begged them to let her stay and die right there. She died on the way in horrible conditions.
Shura was the only one who survived and could return to tell her story. She and her mother fled to a displaced persons camp in Germany. There she married Ilze Akerbergs. They emigrated to Brooklyn, New York, and started a family. Biruta Akerbergs, my sister. She's the daughter of Olga Schott and sister of Mikhail Akerbergs. She was born in Esslingen, Germany, in a displaced persons camp. When she was 3 years old, she emigrated to Brooklyn, New York, along with her mother, father, and grandmother, and there she grew up. She received degrees for biology and art at Brooklyn College and painted murals in various locations, such as her town of Liverpool, Pennsylvania, as well as Bass Pro Shops all over the United States. She married Kai Hansen in 1982. Erik and Ingrid Hansen were born of Kai and Biruta Hansen. They grew up in Baltimore and then in Pennsylvania. Erik followed in Father Kai's footsteps as a tugboat captain, while Ingrid married and moved to Brazil to start her own business as a teacher of English as a second language.